Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
So
What's the site called?
SciFi DIstilled. Like we're drinking distilled beverages.
Okay, here it comes.
And we're distilling science fiction stuff.
And we're distilling science fiction. And we are live, according to Facebook.
All right. Let me see if I can bring up.
Or Facebook has lied to us before.
I'm just working, getting the open.
And Roy's here. Hi, Roy. They all come trickling in right at the beginning.
Ooh, wait, stop.
I don't think yelling at it really helps.
All right. So, we lost this video, but I will run our open since we're live. Hi, guys.
I'll come back.
Screen. Let me get my click. Takes me. And we want to.
I'm clear. Scott Johnson says, hi, Jeff. If you, I don't know if you'll remember all of us, because I know you met like a ton of us, and then.
I remember Scotty. How's he doing?
He says hi.
Scott was very excited.
He was very excited
coming
that
on.
you were going to be on.
So
Ed should be here at some point tonight too. And
yeah. Okay, I'm going to run the open, guys. So just
run the open.
Hang in there. As soon as I click that and share, and here we go. All right, welcome everybody. We're officially started now. I like to welcome our guest this week, Jeff Barklage, DP extraordinaire. Some of you guys might remember him from that thing most of us worked on called New Voyages. But Jeff, welcome.
Hello.
So you have done obviously a lot of stuff, but you pretty much taught the gang the Finnerman lighting. And where did you learn it from? And why is it so unique?
That's a good question. I mean, I'm just a huge film fan. So over the years, I had a chance to really watch a lot of films, of course, and work with a lot of different DPs and see how different people attack different situations in certain ways. And I worked with some really great guys when I was coming up in the business, and they taught me how to work with hard lights. Soft lights that we have today haven't been around for more than, like, say, 15 to 20 years. Prior to that, everything was hard light. You needed a lot of light. You needed it concentrated to get the exposure on the film, and that's what made the film noir look. You had to have lights that were just punching through, just to bring up the levels in such a way that you could make the people, the actors, stand out from the background. And when you look at Jerry's stuff, Jerry, I call him color noir because it's actually like the black and white film noir that you see in the 40s and 50s that was black and white, and he actually transitioned it into color because that was when NBC was part of the whole thing with RCA and pushing new color televisions and such, and they mandated colors on the set, colors on the wardrobe, colors on everything. So he took his approach to lighting and injected color into it and made this really beautiful color noir.
And a lot of that came out of, at least for Star Trek, NBC and RCA wanting to punch as much color into the shows as possible. I mean, that's kind of where the red shirts came from, and all the red that we saw added to the bridge, the colors. But at least what we say on the tour is that it was cheaper to light with gels than it was to repaint walls. And
right, exactly.
The shows back then doing that, were all the shows suddenly incorporating color in different lighting schemes?
Well, it's kind of weird. You look at color TV shows from that era, and some of the shows would start the first 2 or 3 seasons in black and white, like Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, Lost in Space. They all started in black and white just because it was cheaper. But Star Trek started right off the bat in color. But the other series then would pick up the slack, and when they got renewed for like the second season or maybe the third season, they could inject more money into it and actually afford color film, because color film was 2 or 3 times more expensive than black and white. Plus the whole process of color correction was something that was more expensive than just doing straight black and white prints. So I think those series had to end up changing over. If you look at any of the original color photographs from the Lucy show, you'll see hideous colors. Like Lucy would oftentimes wear a dress that in black and white looks yellow. It was brown velour. horrible. And the colors of the wall, like the trim was green, and the walls themselves were this crazy purple color, which in black and white would photograph the different tones of gray. But if you saw them in color, like if you were a studio audience member, you would think, what are these people smoking? Because this stuff looks crazy. But that's just what it took back in the days of orthochromatic black and white film. They had to do this to make it look great in the gray values. So I'm wondering, like, for instance, with Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea and Lost in Space, when they made the transition over from black and white to color, if they had to like make a whole new color palette, like I think that like on the costumes from Lost in Space were a whole different color tone for the first season when they were black and white. Then when they went to color on second season, they had to switch over to true colors that looked, you know, rendered great to the human eye and to the film. So there was a huge transition, I think, from wardrobe and from hair and makeup, and also to the set decoration.
It almost reminded me, this is kind of a weird parallel, but when, you know, I was involved in television production when the channels was going from standard definition to HD, and all the sets and stuff that were built for standard definition had to be trashed because they looked terrible in high definition, because we were using styrofoam and, you know, spray painting pieces of styrofoam and sticking them on a wall and looked good in standard definition. And then in high definition, you go, it's like, if you watch the Blu-rays of Star Trek, you can see all the mistakes, you know, the cracks, the bad filler.
Oh, right.
There,
screw heads on panels and everything.
All that stuff now, which you couldn't see in, you know, standard definition. You film it in a, you know, on film, and then you go and you transfer it to video, and then you broadcast it. By the time it gets to, you know, on somebody with rabbit ears, you're lucky you see a picture at all.
Exactly. I think that's why they remastered some of the special effects, because back then, you know, they had to make 2 or 3 or 4 generations of film to make the matte, the counter mattes, and then the posi and the negatives for everything. So for instance, when you see the Enterprise fly through space, if you look at it in HD, there's so much grain structure buildup because the piece of film you're seeing is 4 generations away from the original. And every time you make another dupe of everything, it becomes more grainy. So I think that's one reason they went ahead and they did the new CG stuff. Although me being a purist, I don't want to see that. I want to see all the matte lines and all the garbage, you know. But it's funny, when I was a kid, I used to get these Super 8 movies. That's before VHS tape, and I'd get them and I could play it. And I had one of Star Wars, and it was like maybe a 4-minute little, you know, 50-foot roll of black and white Star Wars from the first Star Wars film from '77. And whenever the Millennium Falcon would fly in the space shots, you could see the actual hand-drawn garbage mats around it. And the ship would fly a little bit, and then you'd see this mat switch over and fly a little bit more, switch over. And it was like, what is that? And that's what made me kind of think of special effects. I thought, what is this process that makes this ship fly through space? And how am I seeing the behind the scenes? And I guess because it was a black and white, high contrast print, things showed up that never showed up in the theaters.
Actually, it's interesting, you know, that you mentioned that, because on the when the VHSs finally came out of Star Wars, before they remastered them, you could still see those matte.
Oh, could you really?
Yeah, you could still see the little boxes following the TIE fighters around, which even in production, I was like, why couldn't they fix that?
Right, exactly. Exactly. You know, when Laserdisc first came out, when I was in college, I was working at Radio Shack, and they had, this is previous, I guess it was video discs. I don't think they were laser discs, but they were still like this weird LP clear plastic thing.
Yeah, the RCA ones. Yep. I remember.
Yeah, and I had one of the original Star Wars, and it was the original cut. And I just gave it away to somebody, and not knowing that it's worth a lot of money because it has the original edit. You know, it has, it's called The Star Wars, and it wasn't, no New Hope was on it or anything. It was pretty wild. But
at least with Star Trek, if you buy the Blu-rays, you can watch the original or the remastered.
And no, that was smart on their part.
In fact, you can flip mid-viewing back and forth if you want by hitting, I think it's the camera angle. You know, on your DVD, you could flip it, so you can just you can go back and forth. So at least they left those of us that were purists and want to watch the original effects. I'm pretty sure, you know, we had Mike and Denise Okuda and Doug Drexler on last week, and, you know, Mike did all those graphics.
Nice.
And him and Denise. And, you know, I'm sure that was part of he's like, we got to at least keep the original.
Right. That's very good. I mean, there's a lot of people that are purists and they want to see it. Hey, and then speaking of high def, when high def first came out back in the mid 80s, I was working for a company that did a lot of Procter and Gamble commercials, you know, like Bounty and Charmin and Oil of Olay and all that stuff. And we started some of the first tests on HD, and these were immense cameras. I mean, they were just giant cameras, and they were 1080. We're going, ooh, wow, 1080, you know, it's incredible, because everything we shot before that was either on film or on videotape, which at that time for broadcast was 525 lines of resolution. So they brought these cameras in, they brought these guys in from LA, and we were doing tests on people. And we were doing a test for the ad agency for Oil of Olay, which is now just called Olay, but it was for skin tone, for skincare, for fem care and stuff. And it was funny because we actually would bring models in that were like 12 years old, 15 years old, 20 years old, 25, 30, 35. And we were trying different close-ups with these new cameras to see what would happen when we're doing close-ups of female faces. And those cameras, when they first came out, they were hideous because every single pore, every capillary, every even little vein under your skin would show up, like, and it was amplified more than you normally see with the human eye. So we were doing stuff for some kind of dry skin, and we had to use kids that were like in junior high to do close-ups, because anybody who was 20 years old or older, their skin looked like it was like a mummy. It looked horrible under those original HD cameras. It was crazy. We even did UV tests. They were trying to say that the new Oil of Olay had some kind of UV properties, so it would save your skin, you know, from being outside in the sunlight. So they had this crazy box they built, that hole cut out, and the actress could sit her face in it, and it would play a UV light on her face. And it wasn't UVC, it wasn't the horrible one, but it was a UV light. And under that light, it made this crazy wrinkles and yellow valleys, and it was like a horror movie. And of course, cameras have since then evolved to the point where they're not seen inside your skin like that. And you could use any normal person, you know, to do it now. But back then it was crazy, because we were told by the HD people that this HD was such a immaculate system that you couldn't have any camera movement. You couldn't have any takes that were fast, because it would look like live theater and people would get bored. It was all these crazy ideas that this HD is so monumentally different that it's going to completely distract people to the point where they can't see what you're showing. All they're going to do is see the technique.
Yeah.
That, as we know, has changed.
Yeah.
So,
I remember, you know, we're going down this HD rabbit hole. I remember the first time when we started this late 90s, I was working at a PBS station, and they bought a couple of HD televisions, which were still tube. They hadn't come out with flat screens yet. This is like 96, 97. And these things were I want to say they were like a 29-inch tube television, 16 by 9. Took 4 guys to lift this thing up. I mean, it was just immensely heavy. And the interesting thing about that is Sony had to invent new glass, a new formula for glass to make the tube strong enough, because they were so large, they would implode on using the regular standard glass that they use for tubes. So Sony had to like reformulate glass to make it, because otherwise if they made it thick enough to withstand the pressure, because it's a vacuum tube, it would be ridiculously heavy. I mean, it was already insanely heavy as it was. I mean, yeah, so it's just, and then we got flat screens that we just pick up and carry under our arms. You know, I pick up a 60-inch flat screen at work, you know, move it if I have to. It's not that.
Yeah, times have changed in a very good way for most things, not everything, but that's great.
Yeah. So, you know, yeah, it was an interesting transition, but I imagine the color was very similar, like we were talking about. You know, there was like people like equipment had to be changed. Everything was, you know, new.
I'll tell you one quick story. When I was a kid, and this might have been, I don't know, back in the late 70s, early 80s, my grandmother had like the first 19-inch color TV. I don't know why she bought it, but she got it. And it was like, wow, everyone in the neighborhood came by to see it. It was pretty wild. And within a year, the picture tube went out. So she called the guy, he came out, it was under warranty from Sears or whatever it was. And this guy comes over, and he was very theatrical, and he pulls the back of the TV out, and he goes, okay, everybody stand back 5 feet. And he puts this big leather glove on, and he gets a screwdriver that's wrapped up in electrician's tape up to the very tip. And that's the only thing that was bare metal. He goes, here we go, stand back. And he reaches back behind the TV set, and he touches the coil on the back of the picture tube, and it makes this immense explosion of sparks. And I guess what he was trying to do was knock out some kind of capacitor that was charged on the picture tube itself. But it scared the piss out of me and everybody around, to the point where every time we had a movie television that was an actual CRT, I would say, not me. I'm not going to get near the back of a TV set because it looked like it was going to explode.
It's true. Now, I don't know exactly what he was doing, but those old televisions used to have a lot of high voltage capacitors back there. Normally, if you unplugged them, you left them for 20 minutes to half an hour, they would naturally discharge. But I remember my dad, we had the old Zenith color television, tube TV, and that thing had problems like they always did. And my dad laying behind that TV, and you'd go to Radio Shack. Remember the tube tester?
Yep.
Tube tester, testing all the tubes and then going back and seeing, and then the color would be, and he's like, quit watching cartoons. I can't tell if the color's right. Cause who knows with a cartoon, if the color's right, especially on some of those, what was it? The guys, the ones that did like Star Trek and stuff, they would just use star colors for no reason. That's why we had scribbles and stuff. They wouldn't even make any sense half the colors they would use.
All those Hair Bear Bunch and everything had the crazy colors and stuff.
Yeah, it's like Saturday morning. What else you gonna watch? It was cartoons.
HR Puff and stuff. Oh, that's great. Are there any questions anybody has typed in?
I'm just seeing who's saying hi. Fez said, if you remember Fez says you are the lighting god. They are just they're talking about Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea moving from navy to bright colored coveralls. They're kind of just talking about what we were talking about. They're saying that it was distracting to see the garbage mat, like moving with stuff. Let me see what else people got going on. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and
having
type
their
them
own
in.
Conversations without us.
Yeah, sometimes we talk about it. Yeah, and Roy is just talking about the Galileo 7. You can see a lot of those effects on Galileo 7 because we started talking about it.
So how did you learn the Finnerman stuff though? Other than you just watched it?
Yeah, we started talking about it.
I just watched and watched. And what's interesting was that this is before I met him. I watched and watched and watched, and I kept noticing that pattern that's behind your hat right now on the set walls. And I would take screen grabs, and this was back before I could take screen grabs like you normally do, which is was it Control 4 or whatever it is on your laptop. I would take photos off the monitor, and I had a buddy of mine that worked as one of the on studio grips. Frank worked at Paramount Picture as a grip on staff there, and I had him go up into the catacombs, he calls it, which was this attic in one of the buildings there, and hunt around for those. And those cookie patterns, and he couldn't find it. He found things similar to it that they used to use for carriages. It's like, imagine an old time shoot where you had people in a carriage, and the interior shot where you're looking at them and the carriage is supposedly moving. They actually took these circular cookie patterns that were quite large, like 5 or 6 feet in diameter, and they would hang them on stands, shoot a light through it, and they would stick branches on them, and they would spin them around, so the light that would come inside to hit their faces would be like branch patterns and stuff like that. He found a bunch of those, but he couldn't find the enigma, that you have behind you. And I kept noticing how Finnerman would use cookie patterns, all kinds of organic patterns, and non-organic like that one. I always used to think that was like a cathedral window, I called it. But then I found out that it was made by a guy that he used to work with, Harry Stradling Sr., who did like Gone with the Wind, and did tons of movies that Jerry worked on as an operator. And I started figuring out that he actually pulled some of these techniques from people he had worked with in the past and such. But I just noticed that Finnerman had a tendency to light like they did in the 40s and 50s with the hard light, let it fall off the side of their faces and such. And then if you read the Making of Star Trek book, he mentions that he was taught that you take the key light and you move it far enough around until it's scary, and then it's set right. I thought that's interesting. I would never use that on a female, but on like on Kirk or Spock or whatever, I'd definitely use it on them.
You've got an amazingly sharp eye if you were discerning the cookie pattern on the wall, because usually it's diffuse enough, like it's softened enough.
Yeah.
Sometimes you see that's a pattern. You can see the pattern.
You know what's funny? If you ever watch, like, which episode is it? I Mudd. There's a scene like in the royal chamber, I call it, where Harry Mudd has his little throne room in the very center, and then you see are they triplets or the twins on either side of him? Well, they actually did a mat there, and they would put him in. He actually had the same pattern on one side and on the other side.
Oh, did he really?
To the point, it's like, oh, I see. And then if you watch Bread and Circuses, the first scene you see inside the studio where they're having the fight, and the guys turning up the hiss and the boost, the audio sounds and like that, and McCoy and Spock are fighting. You can actually see the actual cookies on C-stands off to the back side.
Because there's like camera equipment, like they're filming
Yeah,
In
because
the
Exactly.
show they're filming. Yeah.
So I saw that. I took screen grabs of that, and I have a friend that works at the American Society of Cinematographers in Hollywood, and I sent them photos of this, and I said, "Look, I got to find out what these are because I haven't seen. A standard cookie looks like a branch pattern. That's what when you look up a Cucaloris on the set on anything like Google or whatever, you see things like, Venetian blinds, or you see like the tic-tac-toe, window patterns and stuff like that, but you never see that. And then sure enough, one of the guys there at the American Cinematographer at the ASC said, yeah, this was from Harry Stradley. And I went, okay, that makes sense. And then I went back to Harry's stuff and did research backwards and found that he had used it on some stuff he shot with Joan Crawford and such. So it was like interesting to kind of tie it all together.
So
but I wanted to keep it secret because I didn't want the other guys, if you know what I mean, to use it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. Hide it, Rizzo.
Sorry, I didn't realize it was top secret.
That's our
No, it's not
special.
anymore. Believe me, it's definitely public knowledge. And I was really blown away at the other guys' stuff. I haven't watched many of their episodes, but I've seen their lighting. It looks really nice. So anyway.
Yeah, I mean, you're so right though. You watch Star Trek, especially the first season primarily.
Oh yeah.
And you start looking for this pattern in all different sizes. Yeah. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
And like on Charlie X, they would actually put, and as individual spokes, they would put different colored gels in it.
Right.
Like, yeah, you see it all the time. And then when Finnerman took off in season 3 and Al, what was Al's last name? Al took over. He kind of shifted a little different path. He had the same gaffer and the same key grip, but he used a different cookie. He's a cookie that had more of a zigzaggy shape to it. So I guess he just wanted to change it out a little bit for his own.
Put his own stamp on it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So Martin Bend is asking, and I don't know what this is, maybe you do. Do you use Rembrandt lighting? What is
Yeah, that's kind of what film noir, if you take film noir lighting, which is the hard lighting from the side, and you put a little diffusion on it, it'll be keyed from the left side of the screen. And I don't know what happens here because this thing flips the images around. Yeah. But you'll get that little triangle of light right here, which is the bridge of your nose making a shadow here, then the edge of your cheek falling off and stuff. That's typical Rembrandt lighting. And typically it's from the left side.
And was Finnerman the one who created what we call the Kirk light, the very
yeah, there's a couple
narrow,
different theories on that.
Right on the eyes.
Yeah, one theory is that Shatner's toupee was so bad that he had to put a cutter from here up on him because sometimes you didn't see the mesh in it. And I think he did that a lot. You see this light chopped right here. You see the rest of his face, but occasionally they would choke that down a little bit so it's more like just a strip of light right here.
Yeah.
But the Kirk light, yeah. But I hear it's because of the toupee.
Interesting. I didn't know that. I thought it was just highlight the eyes.
Yeah, I know they used a lot of Vaseline when they did some of the female shots there, to kind of give
that they did
to soften the they get those whenever they wanted that beauty shot of a female.
And that's a typical film noir style. If you look at anything, any older films, Marlene Dietrich and Garbo and such, whenever you did like the romantic close-ups, you always see a little sparkle in the eye. Yeah. You see the halo that's from the backlight. You see the diffusion filters, which amplifies all of that, which is so cool.
It's when you look back at the old stuff, all that stuff is clearer than it is now, because everything's because CGI kind of muddies the waters. I think you can't discern that stuff anymore. You have to go back and look at old stuff to really discern it.
Yeah.
And what's wild? What's that?
I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, I was just saying Doug Drexler was talking a lot about that as opposed to practical.
Oh yeah, CGI versus practical.
Practical effects and makeup as opposed to CGI. He's like, used to be when you did makeup, like when he did Dick Tracy, that was it. What ended up on film is what they got. Now, the CGI can be part of the makeup.
But the computer finishes the makeup.
They make uniforms in some of their, one of the Avenger movies, they add in digital effects to the actual actor.
But they tweak lighting. They tweak lighting with makeup all the time too, which is why I'm saying it muddies the waters. I can't discern.
I know there's so much, like if you watch The Revenant, that film was shot outside and that's brilliant, but they did so much of the lighting in post. Like for instance, if it was something that was too hot on one side of the frame that might distract the eye, they would actually take it and through CG, they would actually knock it down and so forth, which is cool because it's another tool in your bag to make it work. And it's a situation where if you're out in these mountains and you're having to live in a camp for 2 or 3 weeks when you're shooting like that, it's easier to do that in post in a warm carpeted environment versus 10 degrees below zero out in the mountains. So you can see how that kind of plays. But one thing interesting is if you watch all the older films, even on the close-ups for most of the time, you have definition in the background. They had a lot of long depth of field in the shots. Like right now, when you look at like me, for instance, you can see the trim back there, and it's pretty sharp in focus. And they didn't believe in really shallow focus too much back then in the day. They would shoot with a higher stop on the lens, which what that means is they'd have to pour a lot of light onto the sets to make the exposure such that you could get everything in focus front to back. I mean, Orson Welles did that a lot in like Citizen Kane. I just can't imagine back in those days when you had film stock that was like 1/10 of the sensitivity of stuff you have today. And everyone's wearing suits. Look at those pictures. Everyone's got a tie on and a jacket. I mean, the studios were either 120 degrees or else they had kick-ass air conditioning back then to survive that. So
yeah, air conditioning really didn't come into what, maybe the 50s or
I don't know how they did it. And the actors weren't just dripping.
In the movie studios, yeah, I don't know how they did it.
Yeah, I don't know how they do either, the makeup and everything. Yeah,
California,
it'll melt off your face if you get too hot. So Jeff, as a DP, what's your so let's say you get hired for a job, and you and the director are mapping it out. What's your preference? Do you want to do everything practical on set, or are you thinking in the back of your mind, okay, well they can tweak that in post? So
don't say it. Don't say it in post.
Well, personally, because back when we were shooting film, and this was up until 2008. In 2008, it was like someone walked up and flipped a switch in the wall that said film to digital. That was it. Bam, that fast, it was gone. When we were shooting film, as a director of photography, I was invited into the post-production end of things where I actually could sit down and go through all the color correction and color timing, they called it, and everything. With digital, no way. The editor does everything now for the most part. And that doesn't always happen, but for the most part, and I mean like 95% of the time, the guy who's actually doing all the audio sweetening, cutting the picture, laying down all of the CG stuff, he's the one he or she are doing the color correction. So it's kind of a weird thing where I have to shoot something that is going to be finished by somebody else. So what I try to do is get the camera set up as much as possible to at least allow them to see what we had in mind when we shot. And that means putting filters in. And what I'll do is I'll actually pull filters out of the camera, shoot a color chart at totally neutral, and then I'll drop the filters back in the camera so they can then see, oh, look, he wants it warm, or he wants it cold or whatever it is. So they can see what we kind of wanted to progress.
Wow,
with.
So that impacts your job way more than I thought it did.
Oh, it really does.
I understood it did. Wow.
Yeah.
That kind of takes some of the fun out.
Well, what's weird is if I'm doing some really big commercial, that's how it is. If I do like a Hallmark movie, I'm invited to the color correction. So it's kind of it's kind of weird back and forth, but I try to do as much in camera as possible.
Does that for cinematographers to also become editor, like to also learn the post side of things, whereas before maybe they didn't? Before maybe they just worried about their camera?
Well, it used to be in the film base, you kind of had to understand how the printing would work, how the printing process would work. And some DPs even requested certain printing stock. For instance, some guys would say, hey, look, when this film is finally going to be printed 200 times or 500 times for theaters, I want you to use this certain Fuji film stock because I like the way it renders my colors better. So, of course, the studio said, sure. But sometimes they would say, yeah, if you're some Roger Deakins or whatever, they would abide by it. But nowadays, it seems like if I can get as much done in camera and give it to them presented that way, there's a better chance they're going to just say, hey, look, this is good. Let's keep on cutting the picture, not worry about the color too much because it's already pretty well set.
Cool.
So,
wow.
I mean, there's some instances, like for instance, like if we have to go back and reshoot a scene or we have to shoot inserts for something that was on a cloudy day and then yet it's a sunny day, they have to do what's called scene-to-scene color correction because all of a sudden the scene will be really warm or really cold, whatever, and I'll have to color correct that to match. But for the most part, it's pretty much laid out the way we anticipated, hopefully. So,
wow, I hadn't thought of it that way. That's cool, or not cool, depending on if you're really into all the post stuff, or if you're just like a purist who wants to like.
Well, and there's a lot of times you're shooting like you shoot stuff outside, this is what happens a lot. I worked a lot shooting Kroger commercials, which are as a grocery store, and they have a bunch of Ralphs and Fred Meyers and everything. We usually shoot those on the West Coast, but a lot of times we shoot those up in Portland, Oregon, which is beautiful, but it's sunny one day every 10 days. So what always happens is we'll have a 3-day shoot. We'll go and do a tech scout the day before the shoot or the day before the shoot, and it'll be gorgeous blue sky. And then the day of the shoots, it's rainy and black and shitty outside. So, you know, I know enough that I can say, look, we can burn out the windows, or we can do something so the windows don't look like it's, you know, a biblical plague outside. And there's just a lot of things you kind of have to know trick-wise that can fix situations that you kind of get yourself stuck into. Like trying to talk to the director and not seeing the window too much and seeing something else. Or what I like to do is I'll put a lens flare up. I'll have the gaffer stick a big light outside and just flare the hell out of the camera whenever we see the window, and then we'll pan off of it real quick. So at least the audience says, oh, look how bright it is outside for that brief moment. Then when you pan off of it, you know, you'll get hits of light off different things inside the room, but yet it's pouring like crazy outside. So there's ways you can kind of fake it. And you know that in advance you can kind of do that.
Tons of tricks. Tons of tricks. You guys.
Similar. I was working on a gardening show at Cypress Gardens down in Florida, and we had, I forgot what time of year we had gone and did all our location scouting. You know, we're going to shoot in this part of the park and that part of the park, and took all our, you know, the sun's over here, the sun's over there. And then the guy that was the host got pretty sick, and he was down for the count for 6-8 months, and then the whole production went on hold. So when he came back, it was like 2 seasons later. Well, the sun wasn't anywhere where it was. You know, it was all more than 90% of it was outside. You know, we had big silks, and I'm like, okay. Same thing with, I had to go to the director and go, look, we cannot shoot this angle anymore because the sun is now directly shooting. You know, it's right in our face. It's just not going to work. You know, we got to. Luckily, the place was gorgeous, so you know, you pretty much turn a little bit, you know, 45 degrees one way or the other, and you got a good shot anyway. But I know I know exactly what you're saying. You got best laid plans.
Right, exactly. It always is that way, you know. And then the thing too, I find out, especially on commercials, that you'll be on a scout, and the producer will say, hey, look, we don't need many lights. Look how beautiful this location is. It's nice and bright and gorgeous, all these windows. And it's like, yeah, And then if we show up here tomorrow and it's pouring down rain and it's black outside, how are we going to do it? So what we'll try to do is work a deal with the rental house. Say, look, you know, here's the reality of the situation. We know we're going to need 2 18Ks and a generator and all this stuff. Can you give it to us on a build if used basis? So in other words, it shows up with us, it's ready to go. If we don't need it, we don't pay for it, but at least we have it there in our back pocket if we do, because, you know, we're not usually shooting 5 minutes away from the rental house. We're an hour or 2 hours outside town and stuff like that. So
yeah, you factor that in.
That was an advantage working like in Cypress Gardens, which is in Winter Haven, Florida. Orlando was only about, you know, maybe a half hour, 40 minutes. So you could run and rent anything you could possibly imagine in Orlando.
Nice.
You know? Because of all the film theory, you know, there's tons of rental companies there. But, you know, I know what you're talking about with weather and stuff. And we were dealing, I said, like we had 20 by silks, and we weren't using any outdoor lighting. It was all natural lighting and bounces and everything. But then it's Florida, it's getting near the summertime. You know, you're watching these storms roll in and they move fast. And I'm telling the director, look, I think we're about done because I'm starting to see lightning strikes, and I don't want to have all these aluminum poles sticking up.
Right. Exactly.
and I had one guy hanging on to a silk on the big Mambo with sandbags, and this is a big guy, and the thing started to lift up with him on it.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, we're done. We're done.
Well, you know, now the union rules are, if you hear a lightning strike, or if you see lightning, or if you hear a strike, you know, in the distance, they have to shut the generator down for 25 minutes. And say you happen to be at 24 minutes in that timing, you're ready to turn it on, you hear another 25 minutes.
No time. Yeah, so you lose time. Yeah.
Yeah, and I understand that, you know, completely, because, you know, it's a giant coil of copper sitting right there on wheels, and it's, you know, a magnet to it, but it's nuts. Are there any questions? I can't, unfortunately, see
Scott's talking about changing the time of day with lighting. Rob is saying it seems overdone color timing spoils a lot of the DP work nowadays.
I know
Can you explain what color timings are for those who might not?
Color timings or color grading, they call it. It's basically just coloring the whole thing. It's like taking a still photo and put it into Photoshop, and you can torque like the saturation, you can torque the color temperature so it makes everything more blue or more yellow or whatever it is, and also you can play with the highlights and the toe of the exposure, the base shadow. You can play with all that, and it's really amazing what you can do. I mean, you can actually paint someone's lips blue, you know, with lipstick and make it any color you want. You know, there's so many cool things you can do now that you couldn't do on film. When I first started in the business, when we did color correction on film, you actually sat in a room with the guy who had taken a one frame of film per every scene, and they put it on this single strip, like a film strip, in this little projector, and they projected on a wall, and the guy pulled out a swatch book of gel colors. He goes, how's this color? How's this color? How's this color? And that was it. I mean, there was no way you could just take one color range and shift it. Whatever you did, shifted everything. So
Right.
it was Fred Flintstone technology. And now today it's basically Photoshop on steroids, where you can do it and it runs in real time. But I understand the question, because a lot of times you watch certain movies and such, TV shows, whatever, you see them have a palette that's like more orange or more purple. And there's actually some things on the internet that shows you the color palettes of certain movies, where it's just a few, 5 or 6 different hues they use. And to some degree, it looks cool. And I think for like a 3-minute music video, it's palatable. But when I start watching a 2-hour movie where everything is just this dark blue, it's just like, really? Is this day for night? Or, how come the spaceship has got blue lights in it? And, sometimes it's like, well, why is there flashing lights in the movie Alien and steam all over it? But, it's just one of those things where sometimes I think it gets pushed a little bit beyond extremes. But it's, to each his own. From a taste standpoint.
Sue is asking, John and Sue part of John and Sue is asking, and you started to touch on this. You started to talk about this. What were some of the key differences in lighting used for black and white and then color? And let's keep it in Star Trek. We can talk about how Star Trek evolved from black and white to color, then to Next Gen, where the lighting completely changed and was just
wasn't black and white.
Star Trek
wasn't black and white.
Yeah, it was. But I see what they're saying. Yeah, Star Trek.
Sorry, you're absolutely right. It was not black and white, but it was.
It had the black and white film noir feel, but it was color. It was
the pilot definitely was a more muted color.
Yeah, there was color, but it was all.
Yeah, it was so weird. Ernest Haller did the first one, the cage, and it was very flat and bland.
Yeah.
And then I think Stradling did the second, and then Finnerman came on season 1 and ran. And to me, season 1 and 2 were the best as far as.
Yes, but then by season 3, wasn't it getting a little flat again, like the lighting?
It was. I've read different things about that. One is that, God, what was Al's name, the DP? When he took over, not only did they cut the budget a lot between season 2 and 3, and they also cut the number of days down. So I think what they had to do was they had to do a broad stroke lighting and not really finesse it. They just had to get the page count shot per day. And that meant some sacrifices. And I think it was the quality of the lighting. And I don't think it had anything to do with George Murhoff, who was the gaffer, or George Rader, who was the key grip. I don't think it was any of their situation. I think they were just forced into this situation where, look, guys, we got to keep this to a 12-hour day. We got to shoot this whole episode in 5 days versus 7 or 8 or whatever they had.
So it was just go. Yeah.
It was just go. But I think the idea that Finnerman in season 1 and 2, especially season 1, he had such high contrast. And you look at the shadow patterns on the wall, you look at the shadow patterns on the fall off on faces, it just had this really meaty, great feel to it. And that was a film noir feel that with color. It's like they actually lit it with hard lights and they really walked the lights around. So there was a lot of backlight, a lot of nice, chiseled light on the faces. And even when you look at Uhura and Spock at their stations, they had those little panels that were above their heads in the ceiling that projected light down. And you see Uhura's, I think was Spock's was hers green and his was blue, or I forgot which direction it was, but they always had these little nuances in there. And then when you see Kirk sitting at this chair on the close-up shot, and it like on Charlie X, or even the Corbinite maneuver, the whole bridge is like dipped down exposure-wise, and he pops out. And he's got this red halo around his head from a backlight, which makes no sense because the red alert sign is the other direction. It just looks so great, and it was like they were trying to make this awesome, cool color statement when they did that, and
they did, beautiful. But then as we kind of evolved into Next Gen, it went back to.
Oh yeah,
I guess they did do a few things, but largely it was just.
Yeah, I think that was just the feel, and maybe it was Roddenberry pushing that. But if you look at the sets, it looks like they try to make as many practical lights on set as possible. Like most of the times, whenever you had a low angle looking up, you saw the ceiling in the shot, and the ceiling was just white milkplex. And I think they kind of let that just become the main motivational lighting source. And even though that was still shot on 35 motion picture film, it just had that feel to it. Yeah. I think everything was shot on film, even I think Enterprise. I think Enterprise was the last series, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I think that was shot on
up until the
now Disco. Now, yeah.
Discovery.
Oh yeah, I haven't seen any of those, but I know the DPs that shot that, Jonathan West and God, whoever shot TNG. I met those guys and talked to them about it, and they just said they were kind of just did what they had to do. I know that whenever they had an episode that kind of went back to the original TOS era, they tried to mimic some of the lighting and some of the colors and such.
Yeah.
And this, for the most part, they did pretty good. But,
they did really like Trials and Tribulations. Yeah,
yeah,
they did a great job.
Great blend.
Yeah.
So that was really great.
That was a genius episode. Roy is saying the DP that you started mentioning, he thinks it might be Al Francis. Possibly?
That's it, Al Francis.
Al
Yep.
Francis.
Al was actually the operator under Finnerman, and when Finnerman took off, and I think he took off for a John Wayne film, I thought. Anyway, when he took off, they bumped Al up, and that's kind of what happened with Finnerman, because they originally asked Harry Stradlin Sr. to shoot TOS, and when he declined, he said, "Well, take my operator." So Finnerman, who actually had been a camera operator up to that point, not a DP, was offered the opportunity to jump to the next level, and that's what happened. Of course, you read the stuff where he was so scared and so worried that he would like vomit at night and stuff like that for the first couple episodes, because he hadn't ever DP'd before, but they gave him a really great gaffer and a really great key grip, and they let him, work it out. So it worked out nice.
Support
That must
staff.
be a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
So oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, moving beyond like Star Trek and stuff, what other science fiction films, movies?
That's where I was going to. Yeah. What else?
What
else catches your eye?
Your.
Oh man. I mean, of course, the two big ones to me are always 2001: A Space Odyssey, and of course Blade Runner, because Cronenberg shot that.
Now, and they're very visually very different. Those two. 2001 to my complete what am I? Civilian eye is a flat wash,
it's almost TNG, isn't it?
Yeah, it's TNG. Yeah. And then Blade Runner is all fun, smoky and rain.
Yeah,
and
it's film noir all over again.
On there. Yeah,
that's definitely what. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
No, but you look at the effects. We were talking about this the other night at day, and it's like you look at the effects on 2001, and you watch it, the 4K, and it looks just as good. I mean, I don't know what the heck they did in 1960s, but as far as the models, I mean, it was just, now granted, they're very simple. There wasn't, and I think, and what Doug and Mike were saying, they were saying, you got to remember those shots were pretty linear.
Right.
The ship didn't
a lot
turn.
of times they were.
The ship didn't turn. Actually, it was just straight going across the screen.
Yeah, a lot of times there were actually high-res photographs that were cut out and put on animation stand for some of the shots of the satellites and stuff. But that's how Doug Trimble did, the moon landings, right?
Yeah, right. Well,
let's talk about Blade Runner a little bit. Like, how did they achieve? Because they were working with rain in shots, not real rain, fake rain, but rain. Like, how did they achieve that dark? But you can still see what's going on.
Oh,
but
yeah.
It's just dark, and I don't even know. Like, nothing spotlight. There's no one light piercing. I guess maybe sometimes there is, but how do they do that to get that ambiance?
I think a lot of times, whenever we get to shoot something that has to be dark like that, we'll actually overexpose it. And then in post, we print it down. Yeah, but what you have to do is you have to make sure your highlights are high enough that when you do print, they call it print it down, but that means they're really darkening the whole picture now digitally. When you do that, you have to make sure that your midtones and your highlights pop out, and then your low exposure on the toe has to go away. But it's so meaty because of that. And you also look at the stuff that Trimble did on Close Encounters, because you have the same kind of an effect. You have a lot of the stuff. You have lens flares. You have smoke. They use smoke in the miniature environments when they shot the flying saucers, and also like the spinner on Blade Runner. And those little tiny halogen lights, they would move around and they would shoot through the smoke environments. And a lot of that stuff, because it was motion control, they could do long exposures. Like, instead of actually seeing a model fly through the space in 3 seconds, it might have been a 30-minute move, really slow, and they held it. Each frame was held open for between 2 seconds and 10 seconds to get enough exposure on it that it actually reads. What happens is, back in the day when they shot that stuff, they didn't have LED lights. They had incandescent bulbs, and if they put those inside the models and ran them up 100%, they would actually melt through the model itself. So they would actually keep the light low down. They would shoot at a different frame rate. And if you watch some of that Roddenberry vault footage of the Enterprise from the studios that you see against the blue screen, if you notice that little guy down on the ground cranking that wheel on the gearhead, he's going really fast. And everything is sped up. I think they shot that stuff between 6 and 12 frames per second and moved the camera slower, because that way they could take the light level down 50 or 80% and not burn holes in the model with all those bulbs in it.
Oh, wow.
So it's pretty wild. Now, of
Martin's
course,
asking-
nowadays you don't have to worry about that, but
Yeah, no, yeah.
Now they
Martin's
wouldn't even use models. So
yeah, things are different.
true.
Martin is asking, was 2001 shot on 16 millimeter?
60. Yeah, it was
60?
actually shot on 70 millimeter, and well, 65 is what they would call it. They would make the prints at 70 mil, but the stock that you would purchase from Kodak was 65 millimeter stock. The cameras, if you see any behind the scene pictures, say Cinerama, they're not true Cinerama Panavision cameras. Cinerama was a process where you actually had 3 cameras that were all tied together that would give you a 170-degree field of view. And when they projected that, they'd have 3 projectors, one for the center, one for left, one for right side. They only made a handful of movies with actual true Cinerama. But the cameras that they used on 2001 say Cinerama, I think simply because the aspect ratio was so huge, but they used 65 mil film in the camera itself. And the same thing for the effects, it was all 65 millimeter. And then they would print it down to 35, which would give you a crisper image.
Oh, that's cool. So speaking of a wide field of vision, and also this kind of also ties into what Rizzo was talking about, filming outside and having changing conditions. Can you tell the kids a little bit about
The kids.
the kids on the show The Mandalorian? They have some pretty cool new, they call it the wall, they call it the LED wall, I think.
Oh, right.
Can you explain what that is and how
Sure.
it works?
Okay, so the origin of this comes from the old studio process photography. What that meant was they would actually project 35 film onto a translucent screen and put something in front of it, like an actor or an actor in a car or a speedboat, anything like that. When you watch any old movies, any of the old Bond films, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, you'll see an actor in a car, he's steering the wheel, and you'll see a projection in the background that never quite works right because it's shaking at a different speed than the car shaking. That was called process photography, and it was a way for them to actually shoot sync sound and such in the studio environment where they didn't have to go out and they could do it all in one controlled environment. So what they did with The Mandalorian is they've actually upped the ante, because not only is it like a projection in the background, but instead of using an actual big giant 35 projector like you see in an old theater, they actually use LCD screens. And these screens are like giant sheets of like bed sheets, basically. They're huge, giant silks or whatever you want to call it, but they actually have LEDs ingrained in them, and they can hang these around, and they actually can make an environment that's sort of like a dome. If you imagine them putting up a semicircular background and then a piece over top of the sky and such, you may not see the piece in the sky, but what it does is whatever color the sky would be, it then reflects that light down on everything in the environment.
On your actor,
it's pretty cool. So I've seen how they shoot the plates for that. They actually have this giant, what's called a cheese plate. It's a big giant metal plate that's probably 36 inches in diameter. And they put 9 cameras on it in a circular. So each camera then picks up however many degrees it takes to make it a complete 360. And they actually overlap each other a tiny bit in their coverage. They take that footage in post and they can actually seamlessly put it together. And it's actually run through a computer. So as you would take the camera itself and pan it, it actually takes the background and spins it around.
Yeah, it moves it on that wall. Yeah.
Exactly. And then they also have a camera pointed up in the air to get whatever skylight would be. And that allows it to put the color of the sky not only onto the person and onto whatever environment they have, but also if they happen to have like a shiny helmet or anything, it projects that image of sky or a mountain or stars, or whatever, onto that.
Yeah,
it's pretty cool taking this old technology and then upping the ante and making it work that way.
It's brilliant. Yeah. So the image on the screen, it's like it's slaved to the camera. So as the camera moves.
Yeah, the camera actually is on it's on a special rig that has encoders. Encoders are a little tiny, think of a motor, but instead of actually having gears on it, it has these little sensor contacts on it. And as you tilt the camera or pan the camera itself, it can sense however many degrees you did that, and then it runs that back to the computer, and it does the same thing with the focus motor. If like you zoom into a close-up of the actor's face and you crank the focus to like say 7 feet, it then throws the background out of focus to the degree it would be out of focus if it was at 7 feet.
Yeah,
and so it's really cool.
It is super cool, and like if let's say the actor has to move and there's supposedly a rock. As you move, if it was just a flat image, like a rear screen projection, the rock would look the same no matter where the actor went.
That's true.
But with this, it's like you're actually seeing around the rock. You can actually kind of see, which is exactly what would happen if you're on a location, right?
And I think that the benefit of it is that actors, normally you watch any of the behind the scenes of the Marvel movies, there's this giant green screen with all these little tape X's all over for tracking marks. The actors the director goes, look at that third one from the left and pretend that's a giant T-Rex monster and react to it, Okay, that's one thing. That's acting. But say you're actually in this environment where you actually can see where you are and you can see what's coming at you. You can see what you're going to walk to or whatever. I think it puts the whole thing into a more realistic mind frame. For everybody involved. Yeah, it's great. And it's got to save them money in the long run, from doing all the compositing. But they said also it's COVID safe too, because then you can actually be inside a location and such and not.
Yeah, this whole thing is actually in a studio, right? Like it's within but it's massive.
Air conditioned.
It looked quite tall when I saw it on Disney Plus there. They were showing it. It looked like it went up a pretty good ways.
Yeah, I think it was like 25 or 30 feet up in the air. So they had a little bit of leeway for tilting and so forth.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they could fly it higher up if they need to, but
if they needed to, yeah.
I
think
cool.
It's the future of,
It is, cool. Probably so. Yeah. The key is to be on the crew that does the backgrounds, because then you can actually go out there and just shoot a ton of backgrounds.
Now, some of them are some of them computer generated? Or we don't know?
Some of them are, I think, to some degree, and some of them may be a hybrid of both computer generated and then realistic. Like, say for instance, you find a cool location, it has awesome rocks, but you got cell towers in the background. I'm sure they go through there and they remove that. They might change the hue of the sky and stuff like that. I just worked on a Netflix thing a couple weeks ago for some show called The Prom that's coming out. I haven't seen it yet. I don't know much about it. I know Meryl Streep's in it and stuff, and they needed shots, background plates for a bus scene. I guess they shot this in LA prior to the virus, but they basically shot this bus on a green screen, and they had different angles, somebody in the passenger seat, driver's seat, back and forth, everything. And they had it all laid out then as frame grabs, and then we had to shoot background plates for that. So we knew what lens they used, and we knew what height we were. So we had to actually get a truck, mount a tripod in it, and actually go down these streets in Indiana that looked like corn streets and, fields and everything. And we shot a bunch of plates for that. And they talked about getting that big plate system in for that, but they didn't get it in for that. So we had to shoot individual angles and such for it. But they were going to then use that, tie it in with that footage. And they had to shoot everything in focus so they could then take it and defocus it in post once they had it all, composited.
Oh, cool. So Michelle has a question. She says, I hope this isn't silly, but it's about colors. My father and I noticed that some networks, now Michelle, you might want to clarify, is this back when you were a kid or is this nowadays? But my father and I noticed that some networks have brighter colors than others. CBS always looked a little softer, whereas NBC was sharper and brighter. Is there a reason for this, or does anybody else notice this, or is it just us and our TV?
You're talking about the old days.
Are you talking about the old days, Michelle?
Yeah,
I think she
talking
is.
about the older, because then she goes on to say, whether it was syndicated.
Kid. Yeah, she just typed that. Kid.
Oh, right. Well, I will say this. It's funny. I'll shoot some commercials that get shown nationally, and I think what happens is, I don't quite know the process, but I know that they have to, when they buy airtime, they have to send the files now. They just send files out to this distribution house, which then reconverts them in another file system. It seems like a weird, convoluted thing, but I've seen where they've taken stuff that we've shot that look great, like a Tide commercial, for instance. A Tide box is orange, and they do something that screws it up, even though it's digital, and it should be impossible to change the color to pink, but they'll change it to pink. And I don't know how that happens. And then I get a phone call, hey, everything's pink. It's like, well, I shot that 2 months ago. I have nothing to do with post-production on it, but it just somehow it changes when they do the conversion over at the places that actually make the conversion digitally for commercials. And
in the old days, did the different networks have different
specs?
Yeah. Were they broadcasting on different wavelengths?
I don't know. I mean, that's a good question.
I might be able to answer that, because when I worked in broadcasting, I worked for PBS, which has PBS, and I believe till this day has the highest standard as far as what goes out over the air, and that's black levels. What we used to sit there and check all that stuff ad nauseum if it came from out of house. And I know that first of all, the FCC has guidelines. Your black level has to be this, your white, you can't crush, you can't blah, 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 not to get too technical with people. But I think different stations, different networks will have they will give you their criteria as this is where you have to, if you're sending us content, it has to fall within these parameters,
Mm.
and part of my job as a broadcast engineer was sitting there watching these shows and watching a waveform and vector scopes.
Oh, right.
And making sure that it tracked, and one time we had a concert that somebody had shot, and I don't know what they did, but the blacks were all crushed. I mean, they were just crushed, and we're like,
Were they trying to make some kind of visual statement?
No, I think somebody just didn't know how to set up a camera properly, or the recorder or something.
Right.
And it was like, we had to go to the producer who brought this thing in from out of house, and we're like, we can't, this is unfit for broadcast, we used to say UFB, and he's like, what do you mean? We're like, we cannot use this, but legally, first of all, it's not only is it out of our spec, it's out of the FCC spec. So,
wow.
Not that the FCC has a guy that goes and here's a fine, it's just, this is the rule. But, so yeah, I don't know what they had to go back and try to fix it in post, as much as I hate to say that.
Jeez.
But it's like, it's not our program here. Give it back to the production house and say, this print is bad. But I think they had discovered, that's what we thought at first, that the copy we had, it was, of course, was videotape, was bad, that they just, whoever did the dub had the settings on the decks wrong. But I think when they researched it, they said, no, the master's like that too.
Oh my gosh.
So
what do you do?
Somebody probably lost their job over that one, but I never did get the resolution of it. But yeah, so in that sense, that I would say each network probably does have within certain, what they consider is acceptable.
Interesting. Maybe not so much anymore.
That might be old though, because I haven't done that in many years. So we're talking like 1990. So I don't know. In the last 20 years, all that might have changed with digital.
Right.
Nowadays, everything's cable or everything's digital. Everybody's streaming.
What's great is that there's so many great TV shows on now. I mean, there's so much content that it's crazy. And then a lot of the stuff looks phenomenal. Like there's that new show, Penny Dreadful, City of Angels. Have you seen that? It takes place in the 40s.
I have that on my queue.
Oh my God, it's just beautiful. Not only is the photography just this immaculate, but like the art direction and the wardrobes for that time period are just really, really, really great. And there's just so much great stuff that's on now. You look back at the Rifleman, and you watch some of the early stuff. I mean, even stuff from the 80s and stuff. You watch Good Times and whatever it is. I'm just like, oh my God, it's horrible when they did 3-camera sitcom stuff. I mean, Seinfeld looks pretty good in HD Blu-ray, but still.
But you notice how everything looked different. Like the Rifleman, remember the Rifleman, but like Bonanza looked like, they all looked the same. And then when you get to the 80s, like the Facts of Life looked just like different shows.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it all had that same look to it.
Exactly.
It's kind of flat.
It
was.
Yeah, it wasn't really interesting. It's just.
Yeah, and I was trying to think of anything that was shot on film. I mean, like Rockford Files has a good look to it, as much as it can from a TV show from that era. But I mean, now it's immaculate how much stuff is just beautiful out there. I haven't seen the new Star Trek stuff at all. I don't know. I've shot a lot in Canada the last couple of years, and actually some of the crew people I worked with had worked next door at the studios we were shooting in, and they had come off. It's Discovery, right? That's the show.
Discovery's going into season 3. Picard just finished the season 1.
Oh, okay. And they
were
raving about it.
By popular demand, they're taking Captain Pike, who was in second season of Discovery, and he's going to get his own show. So we're going to see the Enterprise under Captain Pike and Spock doing their thing. This is post Cage.
I see. Interesting.
Cage already happened. We're gonna, and they're gonna. What's the name of it? It's
Strange New World. Yeah.
So hopefully they're getting back to. We're hoping they're getting back to some core track.
Yeah, we're hoping it gets back to the.
We're hoping.
If nothing else, take a look at Disco just to see like how they tackle.
You call it Disco?
Yeah,
I call it Disco. Yeah. Sue was asking Jeff, have you seen The Expanse, and what do you think of its photography?
I've only seen one episode of Expanse, and I saw that on an airplane. So I was watching on my iPad.
Expanse on an airplane?
I had downloaded
an episode.
Yeah, and actually from what I saw, looked pretty nice.
It's cool. Yeah, it's cool. There's you're right. There's so much content now, and there's some cool stuff out there.
Right, and I need to start. We were binge watching so much stuff for a while. We finally said we got to stop binge watching. I mean, we actually binge watched all of Mad Men in like 2 weeks, and I wasn't working, so we're binging for like 16 to 18 hours a day. It was getting to the point where
shotgunned Mad
yeah, it was
Whoa.
crazy. And finally, you'd say, "Look, I'm addicted."
Great show. I mean, if you're going to
binge show,
it's a great
made
show.
You want to drink the whole time.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking about good shows. Another one I would recommend if you haven't seen is For All Mankind. which is on.
No, I
Apple.
haven't seen that. What is it?
That's it's an alternate history. It's as if the Russians got to the moon before us.
Oh, really?
Like weeks. and it's basically how the space program would have changed or might have changed as a result. We still ended up going to the moon and continuing. In other words, the space program kind of actually continued. The space race continued because the Russians got there first. It didn't peter out like it kind of did in the 70s.
To check that out. Sounds great.
So it's this kind of alternate, and we end up trying to put who's going to put a moon base first and that kind of thing. And it's Mike and Denise Okuda actually work on it. But they just finished. Season 1 is available on Apple TV, and season 2 was this close to being completed when COVID hit. So they had 2 more episodes to complete. So they're obviously all the post-production on the other ones getting done because those can be done,
Right.
But
what about the Orville?
Doug
Drexler works on the Orville.
Working on the Orville. I love the Orville. Its tongue is very firmly planted in its cheek, but it's funny and it does Star Trek, like it does it really well, but it does it with great humor.
Yeah. Along that line, I would recommend Space Force on Netflix.
Yeah, Space Force is interesting too.
Steve Carell, sort of The Office meets the Space Force, but it's actually pretty funny and pretty good show overall. I think definitely pokes fun at some politics and things.
Nice.
It's only a half-hour show, 10 episodes, so
you can
binge it in no time.
I could watch that one evening.
Yeah, since we're all home thanks to the pandemic, we find that we're watching stuff. So. I'm just Michelle. Let's see. Michelle said she never saw. Michelle, watch the Orville.
Watch the Orville, Michelle. I mean,
I'm just scrolling through the comments. They're making fun of disco. Watch it anyway. It's really good.
I think I can watch it free. Every now and then you can watch it free.
Roy says each decade has its own tone. You can almost tell if something was the 50s, 60s, 70s. Sure. That's true. 70s. That's very absolutely true. You know right away.
It's like music. You know what I'm saying? Each kind of decade had its own kind of musical feel.
Right.
Television.
And that's same for movies. Every now and then we'll sit there and we'll flip a channel and we'll say 1974, and we'll then hit the info and see if that's right. You're right, absolutely right.
Like the 80s always had their musical kind of when they were like if they had to build something in the movie in the film, they'd have that musical montage.
Oh, right.
Always where they're running around doing things. It was like every movie seemed to have that. It was like that was like an 80s thing.
That's great.
You could always pinpoint the decade.
So speaking of the 60s and 70s, I will just remind all our viewing audience, and Roy, you're going to have to help me out on this one because I forgot to ask you today. Roy's Tie-Dye Sci-Fi. Roy tackles all sci-fi of the 60s and 70s, and I don't know what he has on Friday. Maybe he'll remind me, but on Sunday, he has Brian Johnson, who worked he worked on a bunch of stuff. He did Star Wars.
Space 1999.
Space 1999, exactly, yes. Yeah. So he'll have Brian on Sunday. And Roy, if you can type in the comments what you're doing on Friday, I am so sorry that I forgot. I apologize. But just wanted to get... Yeah.
I can tell you something real quick about that. I worked on this Hallmark movie, a Christmas movie that Mariah Carey directed, and I was a DP on it. And they were a little worried about Mariah because she had never really directed before. So they brought a ghost director in, and his name was Kevin Connor. He was this elderly British gentleman, and he's the one who directed like Brian the Brain on Space 1999. He did a couple of episodes. He also did Motel Hell, and he directed At the Earth's Core, Land That Time Began, all those Doug McClure movies. So after we'd shoot sometimes, he and I would go to a bar, I'd buy him a bunch of G&Ts, and he'd tell me stories about Martin Landau and Barbara Bain and everything, and it was incredible.
Oh my God, that's so cool. So awesome. You just caught Roy's attention, I'm sure, because Roy, I don't know if you remember meeting him at the set, but he's the guy that runs the Space 1999 conventions when they're here in the States. And then sometimes they do them in London too. So he is all about Space 1999. He had actor Nick Tate on his Tie-Dye Sci-Fi. And what was the other thing he did that was, he had another
actor.
Another actor too.
From Roy. By the way, Roy's doing Zardoz on Friday.
Oh, Zardoz.
Oh my gosh.
Thank you for reminding me of that. That's Sean Connery.
Have you seen the Zardoz cosplay?
Bathing suit.
Very bizarre film.
Yeah, there's some cosplay people that dress up like that, both male and female in the Zardoz costume, and the women look so much better than the guys, but it's just crazy.
You think?
I wonder why.
Yeah, it's kind of like there's a couple that do Galaxy Quest.
Oh, really?
They'll do either the Galaxy Quest crew members or they'll do the aliens, the whatever the Flormians, Thermians or whatever they were.
They're quite good at it too.
We saw them at Star Trek Las Vegas the one time, and they came out in both outfits 2 different days, and they are
they're very good at it. Yeah.
They got the big beryllium sphere they're rolling around, and which is
nice.
They're in the documentary. If you watch, there's a documentary about the making of that film, which is pretty good.
Right.
Galaxy Quest.
They're actually in that film because they're such hardcore fans. I love the cosplayers.
If you have any last anything, now is the time to type it.
Yep, we're getting near the end of our hour.
We are getting near the end of our hour. Everyone say thank you so much to Jeff for coming to hang with us.
Oh, this has been great.
We miss you. Well, we haven't been there, but
yeah,
we miss you. We haven't seen you. You haven't been out for like any of the. Did you make it to the Shatner? No, you never made it to any of our Shatner events.
No, I never did. Every time I was booked on something else, and I had to take. I'm a freelancer, so I have to take the money when I can.
Jobs.
I actually had bought tickets for the first one, and I had to sell it to some guy.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
I got whatever happened schedule wise. But
well, he's coming back in November.
We hope.
Assuming
right. The pandemic cooperates with us.
Yeah. We're crossing our fingers that we get.
So is James doing a TNG in the stores next door? Is that what's going on, or is that still
the plan?
Nice.
He hasn't done much other than started cleaning the building.
I have not been able to move forward on that. Thank you, pandemic.
Yeah, the pandemic certainly put a crimp in a lot of that. So.
Yeah, the pandemic kind of screwed everything.
Well, at least he's open now, right, to the public. They can.
Yeah, he is open. Right now. Absolutely. You can go take a tour.
He contacted me a while ago. He was wanting me to get the Mitchell and the Dolly out of there because they needed more room. That my camera is probably not on display anymore, but I might come up there and get it sometime.
Oh, please come up when Mr. Shatner comes up.
I know, it'd be great to see him. Any other last minute questions there? Or?
Everyone says, Chris LaRoche says, this was so educational. I loved you. Yeah. I loved it. So good to see you, Jeff.
That's awesome. Tell me else.
Scott, same thing.
Scott says, great to see you. Yep. Everyone's saying, thank you so much. And so good to see you.
So next week, what do we got on tap next week, MB?
I actually don't know.
We don't have. It's going to be
next week. Yeah,
it's going to be. I think it might be. I think it might be a make me watch.
It might have to be make me watch.
What's that?
Oh, I'm gonna make you watch, right, Rizzo?
You're gonna make me watch. We had this thing where we pick a film or TV show that one of us has not seen and make the other person watch it. So it really started out on Roy's show when he made her watch Moonraker. She had never seen it, and then had to come on the show and talk about it. So then we took it, and then me and Kent Schmidt came up with we're trying to find a film that Mary Beth hadn't seen, and we did Army of Darkness.
Oh, nice.
Which is a good
choice. Army of Darkness.
He fought us.
That was interesting.
Didn't want to see a horror movie. We kept telling her, no, it's Three Stooges.
But yeah, Bruce Campbell's so great in that film.
Yeah, the whole film, it's just funny. I was watching it. I was watching even Evil Dead 2, and because I hadn't seen it in many years. I'm like, oh my God, this movie was so great. It was so
yeah. Have you ever seen Iron Sky?
No, I can't see it.
Oh my God, you gotta watch that.
Iron Sky.
That's like a Nazi space thing, right? Sort of.
The Nazis at the end of World War II, they built a giant moon base on the dark side of the moon.
About what year approximately was that?
Maybe 7 or 8 years ago it came out. They made Iron Sky 1 and 2. Don't watch 2.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
Just watch 1. It's just goofy.
Yeah, don't take it too seriously.
No, it's got some good effects, but like you said, most of it's CG stuff.
So, but I had never seen. I think next week we'll do. I'd never seen Princess Bride, so that seems to.
Okay. Well, they're remaking that. I hear.
Yeah, that's another reason why we thought maybe
we could do Princess Bride, or I might make you do the Yamato space battleship Yamato.
Or we could
Japanese
do that one. Yeah.
Now, was that an anime?
No, it's live action. We gotta see what the kids are doing in Japan.
They made a live action one about, I don't know, it was like 10 years ago?
2010.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, 10 years ago. Yeah.
That's cool.
So
hey, so what were you guys drinking?
Oh.
I don't know. I just threw stuff in my tea.
I'm just ginger ale and vodka. I didn't.
Normally we have a designated drink.
Yes.
I saw your recipes online.
Yeah,
and
so
and stuff.
this time I just
We try to make the drink
This
match
one is
whatever
drink what you-
movie we're talking about.
drink what you brung.
Yeah, tonight was just drink what you got.
Nice.
So
So yeah, a lot of times I just throw stuff in the tiki glass, and I got a whole bar in the other room, so you know, I just.
they're all
We'll see
talking
what
about
this tastes
Princess
like.
Bride now. Okay, we better, they're off the subject. Okay, we better wrap it up.
All right.
All right.
On that note, thank you again, Jeff. It's been great.
So much, yeah.
You're very welcome. This has been fun. It's
Always
great seeing you guys again.
Yeah,
It's good seeing you. And again, please come up to the studio. We miss seeing you up there.
I'd love to.
And if there's
Absolutely.
a film movie that you think you really want to talk about, let us know, and you'll bring
Come
it up.
talk.
All right.
This crew will listen all day.
Yeah, anything. We like talk about everything.
Gluttons for punishment. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Take care. It's great
All
seeing
right.
everybody.
Everybody stay safe. We'll see you next week.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.